Hey, so last night I went to go see The Predator. I said I'd make a vlog about it uh, sometime today, and well, here we are. The Predator, awesome movie. Really, really liked it. I think the best thing that I can say about it right now is if you're a fan of the Predator franchise, you need to go see this movie. A lot of the good things about this movie is that it brings a lot of the elements from the first two movies full circle. In particular, it brings references and characters from the first and second movie back into the fold, into the new movie, and with the exception of Predators, it doesn't really reference Predators. In fact, according to what I read about it, it's actually supposed to be set in modern times. It's supposed to take place before Predators, but after Predator 1 and Predator 2. And they do actually kind of make that clear. But I will say this, Shane Black, who wrote and directed this movie, he really loves and he really gets the Predator franchise. I mean, as well he should, because ironically, his most iconic role as an actor was playing Hawkins in the original Predator. And it's kind of funny to think that Hawkins is actually the character that gets killed first by the Predator in the first movie. So it's almost as if his character will now be less remembered than him as a director. Like he's more important to the franchise as a director than he ever was as a character and an actor. But I respect that. I really only have a couple of things that I want to kind of complain about before I get into the meat of what I think is good. And I'm not going to talk spoilers because I do think that even if you're not a fan of the Predator franchise, if you love sci-fi, you should go and see this movie. And it's actually really sad right now that the movie has received such piss poor ratings. I don't know what people are smoking nowadays. It's really disappointing that we can't have good campy fun. I don't know why people are crapping all over it. I think maybe it has to do with the fact that a lot of people they aren't fans of the franchise. They don't know the franchise, and that therefore kind of leads to a lot of confusion. But I will say this. My first gripe with this is highly subjective, and that is the title of the film, The Predator. I mean, don't get me wrong, it's very reminiscent of the very, very silly and questionable naming strategy that its counterpart Aliens has had. You know, Alien, Aliens, Alien 3. We've had Predator, Predator 2, Predators, and now we've had The Predator, almost as if kind of to say, yeah, we're kind of going down this route with our naming for this whole thing. And I really am disappointed because I really think that if you're going to call something, if this is going to be like a continuation of the franchise, and you don't want it to be tied directly into Predators, at least not right away, then you call it Predator 3. And if at worst and at best, you call it Predator 4 with maybe some snappy subtitle. But that's neither here nor there. I've had a thing for the longest time where I never understood why sequels were named the way they were, or why, if they were a long-running franchise and they just so happen to have a subtitle, why they didn't at least list what movie this was. I mean, if it was a prequel, I understand not giving the numerical number of a movie, but still, or anything for that matter, but, you gotta understand where I'm coming from. That can be kind of bizarre, jarring, and upsetting. The second thing is, they actually brought in the son of, both in terms of the character continuity and the actual legitimate family son of one of the characters. Gary Busey in Predator 2 played this kind of Black Ops Man in Black G-Man named Peter Keyes, and in this movie has his son Sean Keyes, who's actually played by Gary Busey's real life son Jake Busey. And I really like the Keyes character in this movie being kind of a direct opposite of his father, but yet still being invested in kind of the Predator thing. And I like what they attempted to do with the character in terms of giving him a background story and branch out. But at the same time, he's killed off within the first, I don't want to say half an hour of the movie because it's an hour 45-minute movie, but he's killed off relatively early on, and I would have liked to have seen more scenes with Keyes and see him continue to develop as a character, or see a couple more callbacks to his dad and his dad's character in Predator 2. Especially explaining how they figured out how to sedate the Predator, because that's one of the things that they actually figure out in this movie. Believe it or not, humanity in this movie, unlike in AVP, they're actually not only able to capture a Predator, but they've actually managed to get their hands on and analyze Pred Tech. In fact, that's what brings Olivia Munn's character, Olivia Munn, by the way, does a great job with her character. She's really almost the sole female role, with the exception of like one other character, the wife of the estranged wife of the protagonist. She's really the female lead in this whole story, and she does a great job. And she actually is almost Ripley-esque in terms of levels of badass. She's not like Lexi Woods from the god-awful AVP movie, who really just doesn't, convey any semblance of competence. Olivia Munn's character is very, very competent and very, very likable, has a sense of humor about her, as well as being able to handle herself in a firefight, which this movie gets into quite a lot of. It's actually more of a homage to the first Predator than, say, like the second Predator and even Predators. I think that, and honestly, it does a great job of focusing on the Predator without having the Predator and their mythology and their backstory, without having the Predator on screen nearly as much. Now, two minor spoilers that I'll give is I like what they did with the concept and how it's a logical step forward for these movies to take. First and foremost, not only referencing the canon, but explaining why the Predators might continue to come to Earth and why they come to Earth in actual, greater frequencies. It's kind of explained that the Super Predator, for lack of a better term, that shows up towards the second third of the movie and ends up killing what we would, identify as a more standard Predator, is actually a upgraded super genetic enhanced Predator who's been taking which takes the spinal fluid and from the skulls and the spines, because predators collect the skulls and spines of their trophies, humans and otherwise, and that they have been using them to augment themselves and basically evolve to better their species, to create a new next stage of evolution for the Yautja, which is the name for the predator race. And that is really cool. I like that a lot. It actually does do a great job of explaining just why the predators would continue to show up in Earth with greater frequencies. And while I will kind of argue that the idea of global warming being one of the reasons why they continue to come, because they love the hot, humid weather, is being a bit of a forced environmental thing, I'm not going to deny that, at least from the argument perspective, that I guess it makes some degree of sense for the story they're trying to tell. But I like that idea. It makes the predators seem even more or less not like vicious and malicious murderers, which they can be, but it also tells you that they have an underlying purpose. This isn't just a culture thing, but it is actually legitimately for their own species' sake. So it's twofold, and I always felt like the predator hunts might have needed something like that to make it so that you didn't necessarily sympathize with the predators, but you didn't necessarily hate their guts either, because you would argue that how far has humanity gone with its cloning and its genetic research, and how far will we continue to go to ensure our own species? What steps will we take? And you could almost see the Yautja as saying, well, they're the most advanced race in this film universe, and as a result, they're doing things that humanity would very well do if they had the technology and the capability to do so to ensure our species' survival. So I really like that. I also really like how they actually get a military team together without necessarily making it like this black ops team that it was in the first movie, or this ragtag group of criminals with sketchy pasts like it was in Predators. Instead, it's actually a group of military washouts with psychological problems who you could argue, yeah, their disappearance would be convenient for the government and everything like that, and therefore, they're the perfect heroes because in many regards, most of them are dead anyways. Like, they're going to be shipped away to a loony farm where they'll die forgotten and alone. So this is a redemption for many of them, and it's actually kind of a shame that the movie follows the Predator formula of all these characters getting, almost all of them except for the main character, a sniper named McKenna, getting picked off at the very end. And actually, I will say this: the characters, you may not get as much as I would have liked out of them, but you get about as much development as you would expect. In fact, I'd say you get much more development for the characters than you do in the original Predator, as much as I love it. And even Predators, which actually kept its characters, both movies kept their characters alive a lot throughout, say, half the movie. This movie actually keeps the renegade outcasts or the military washouts, the loonies, it actually keeps them alive throughout almost to the third act. Like, actually into the third act is when they finally start getting picked off one by one. And many of them have, like, these noble deaths, and they actually go out fighting the freaking Predator, which, if you're going to have them get killed off in the final act, that's how they should go out. Which is actually kind of amazing, considering that not only do they fight the regular Predator, they fight the Super Predator, and they fight Predator Hunter dogs, which is just freaking awesome. I loved it. That's something that's been missing from the series, and I was wondering if they were going to ever do something with that beyond Predators, where, they had those Hunter dogs. I was kind of hoping they'd make a comeback, and I'm glad they did. The other thing that the last thing that I will say that I do like from a story perspective, and then I'll kind of give my final thoughts, is I like how the government, I mentioned how they're actually studying PredTech, but I like how they're actually trying to use it essentially to defend themselves. The government's not using it in a way that, is like, malicious, like they're gonna, try to shadowy take over the world. Now, don't get me wrong. Forget the main government guy. He's kind of one of those, he's kind of sort of both good and bad. You can tell that he wants to do right by the human race and the United States government, but he also has no problems shooting what he feels to be a security risk. Like when Olivia Munn, when the Predator breaks free, he actually gives orders to execute Olivia Munn's character. That's how callous he is. And to be fair, the Predator pretty much does all the other work. Like, he kills any other witnesses for the guy, but he orders Olivia Munn, who manages to escape, her character to be killed if the Predator doesn't kill her. And so, that's the kind of guy we're dealing with. And he also goes so far as to kidnap McKenna, the sniper's kid, at one point, because the kid actually becomes an important plot device that I won't spoil here. But in other ways, I will say that the characters are well-rounded. They're likable. Some of them are not too sympathetic, like the human villains. And you get a lot of firefights, with the soldiers, the washouts, taking on these government mercs and soldiers, and that's really kind of cool. I almost wish that the Predator interjected himself a little bit more into these sequences, or if there was like a hint that the Predator was watching from the sidelines or maybe picking off a straggler or two in some of these firefights. But then again, it just makes when the Predator shows up, when the respective Predators show up, it just makes them more badass. I also wish, this is my only other big complaint now that I think about it, I wish that the non-hybrid Predator, the Super Predator, and the regular Predator would have fought more. Or I wish that the regular Predator had a scene where he actually tried to communicate with the main characters and let them know what he was doing here. Because you don't find out what the Predator, the original Predator, that crash lands on Earth in the very beginning of the movie, you don't find out what he's doing there or why he would be there until like 3-4 in the third act, the very end of the movie. And that's fine. You don't have to give away everything right away. I just would have preferred a bit of a hint at an explanation. that isn't really given until the very, very end of the movie, unfortunately. Otherwise, the music is very minimalistic, but what tracks are in there works. They even resurrect the old Predator theme by Alan Silvestri at the very end in the credits, which is awesome. And the visual design is amazing. Like, I love how the characters are, they look unique and they look cool. I like, there's a couple, of the Marine characters or the ex-military washouts that, might look familiar to you if you watch a lot of TV in terms of actors. I didn't really know a lot of the cast with the exception of Jake Busey and Olivia Munn. That could be chalked up to the fact I don't watch a lot of TV or even Netflix. So, the names maybe aren't necessarily as much of a standout as, say, in the previous films. But then again, you usually only had one or two big names in the previous Predator films. Like, other than Arnold Schwarzenegger and, what was the name of Dylan's character? I'm going to get roasted for this in the comments. I can't remember the guy who played Dylan in the movie. But other than those two guys, who really went on to have a great and successful and lengthy acting career, that you wouldn't say, oh yeah, the Predator was the best, or that Predator was still the best thing they were ever in. I don't know if you could say that for a lot of these guys. Same thing with Predator 2. I mean, you got Gary Busey and Danny Glover and a bit more star power. Also, I'm trying to remember who else was in it. It's escaping me. And then in the third movie, if you were in Predators, you had quite a few characters that you'd probably recognize if you watch any action movies or anything of intrigue, like Adrian Brody, Topher Grace, which that still cracks me up that Topher Grace was, of all people, yeah, Eric from That 70s Show was in a Predator movie. He was in Predators. Go figure. And then you had, like, Danny Trejo in it for a little while. He was one of the first ones killed, actually, in Predators. And Lawrence Fishburne, among others. So it's not like these movies don't ever have stars before or after the films. It's just that they're not necessarily always known for getting star power. So you might not go and see it for the stars, but I'd say go and see it for the script and the visuals, especially the visuals. Both the Predator visuals and especially the stuff that involving the Predator, like those animatronics and special effects are amazing. And a lot of good gunfights and special effects and just overall design. Very well shot, very well edited. You can always tell what's going on and what's happening, which is important. Really like the movie. I recommend it. I don't know what the critics are seeing in it that they don't actually like. But then again, that's, I guess, why many people aren't mainstream film critics, because they will often say that something sucks, and we'll say it's great, and they'll say that something's awesome, and then we'll say it's pretentious, and then that'll end up being the one that wins all the awards. While what we would have picked to win the awards because we enjoyed seeing it the most gets left behind in the dust. But that's an argument for another day. Thank you for listening to this and watching this vlog, this ramble from my car. I am on YouTube known as Jason the Curator, and please like and subscribe to the channel if you liked this video. I don't know if I'll do more movie vlogs like this ever again, but if you guys like it, who knows, maybe I will. All right, bye-bye for now.